So here's the thing about Bojack's professional projects and career. Throughout Bojack's life, he participates in a number of vastly different projects and pieces of media, but ultimately, what Bojack chooses to do in his career has a significant correlation to the point he's reached in his own life, and gives us some insight into how his thinking changes and develops over the many decades that we do get to see him through. And that career begins with Horsin' Around.
Without a home or a family tree.
Until this horse said, live with me.
Now we got a new family. We were lost and now we're found, and we're horsing around.
Of course. When he starts out in his career, as most do who aren't the children of already extremely famous people, he struggles to find a place for himself inside of Hollywood. He does stand up to satisfy that need inside of him to perform, which he gained from a childhood of neglect and being told that he needs to do something remarkable to make a name for himself and make his life worthy, also of course being forced to perform in front of dinner parties and things like that. He gets sporadic roles in commercials and overall doesn't have an awful life in Hollywood at the time. I mean, certainly better than the one he left behind with his parents. But he works as a bartender to earn the money that he needs to live, and it's clear that he's not a fan of the current situation, even though he later realizes that to be the peak of his happiness in The View from Halfway Down. So, when Herb offers him a part in this show that he's pitched to ABC, his opportunity to make it big, he jumps at it, not really caring for what the role entails or the actual contents of the project. In fact, Herb explicitly states that his intention with the show is to get rich, not to make anything that really connects with people. And the show that they end up making is extremely shallow, vapid, relies on cheap laughter, and doesn't really do anything particularly new or groundbreaking. Time and time again over the course of the show, down to the very first episode, we are told that Horsin' Around, though well-liked, was shit. And every time they show us a clip of it during flashbacks, I agree. At first, Bojack worries that he isn't doing enough as an actor, feeling that sort of lackluster energy coming from the poor writing of the show and the general lack of care that goes into making it, as we see when he goes to Herb in the brand new couch flashback. He did start out in Hollywood asking for real roles, and while this one is well-paying and substantial, it's still not really grounded or anything that will truly impress his mother, or as she says, it isn't Ibsen, as we see when she watches the show live in flashbacks in the same episode. But when Herb reassures him that he doesn't actually need to act, that the show they're making is so juvenile, he really just needs to have good diction and enunciation, Bojack sort of slides into that lack of care, forcing himself to accept his position here and eventually believing that this is all he was meant for. Over the years, as Bojack becomes more and more famous for this show that he truly has no interest in making, he begins to lose interest in everything around him. He loses touch with that youthful, ambitious drive that he had to make something that would truly make a difference, even though, yes, as I've mentioned in many different videos, that is largely a product of his parents' treatment, but hey, that's not the only reason anybody does anything, okay? These are all just pieces of Bojack's psyche. We see this directly through his treatment of everyone on the set of Horsin' Around, though. Sarah Lynn and the other children, who are barely even present in flashbacks and are largely ignored and not cared for, which would be helpful given how they're growing up in the public eye in Hollywood, which is extremely dangerous for most kids. Specifically, he doesn't even really treat Sarah Lynn as a child, even stating that she should act older when she expresses sadness over Herb's departure, as she's aged in showbiz years, which means that she should automatically be more mature and cutthroat. He even tells her to give her everything to her fans, emphasizing his own craving for audience attention and praise and pushing it on to her. And we definitely know the effect that this has in her later years with Bojack's advice and her mother's constant presence pressing down on her to consistently keep performing, degrading her energy and fueling her eventual addictions. And he straight up sleeps with Bradley Hitler Smith. I can't even say that name with a straight face. And he straight up sleeps with Bradley Hitler Smith's mother, causing his parents to divorce, and then later not even remembering her identity, speculating who it could possibly be to his face. I mean, there's just a supreme level of indifference that Bojack has adopted over over the years. And not to mention that while he started out wanting to make Secretariat and real things, he kind of just gives up on that. It's not like doing a sitcom takes up all of your time. You can do other projects while you are doing one. Maybe it was more difficult when sitcoms were on cable television, it was more of a constant schedule, but still. Herb and him drift further and further apart as well, as Bojack makes more and more demands of Herb to treat him as if he's a precious star, who is indispensable and can tell everyone on set how to do their jobs. He does little to treat Herb as an actual friend, and even fully abandons him after he pleads for his help to save his job with the network. And even those he bonded with on set, like Sharona, are not given the care or attention that friends actually deserve. In fact, Bojack also casts her away for his own mistake as soon as he's given the choice to. And while it's clear that he feels bad about it retroactively, like he's not a malicious person, she appears in some of his dreams and reflections when he's thinking about things that he regrets. At the time, he didn't care enough for Sharona's career or well-being to truly look out for her. And by the time Horsin' Around ends in a rather unsatisfying and divisive way, I might add, emphasizing the lack of heart or care that was put into it, Bojack has essentially given up on trying to be a sensitive, empathetic person, or any fulfilled human in general. So without Horsin' Around to ground him, all he has to do with his time is drink his days away. But we can see how Horsin' Around as a show sort of represents Bojack's descent into fame. We're making this show that nobody truly cared about or was trying to say anything substantial with, eventually infected him as well, and that lack of care moved to other parts of his life, and only grew and grew, to where by the end of Horsin' Around, we have a different showrunner, so even that tiny bit of heart that was in it, Herb Kazaz, and, you know, the love that the cast had for one another, even that goes away, and there's really nothing left to this show but clinging to fame and money, which is pretty much all Bojack cares about when we begin in the series. Which leads us to his next project, The Bojack Horseman Show.
You mean horsing around?
No, the Bojack Horseman show. It was so dumb. It was the best.
Thank you?
I mean, it was the worst, but that's what made it so good, you know?
Yeah, I got it.
Like, I was laughing at it because it was so bad. Do you understand?
Yes, you're being very clear.
I feel like I'm not articulating. My enjoyment didn't come from a place of sincere admiration. It was more like, what an ill-conceived television show. Who made all those terrible choices? I can't stop watching.
Okay.
We're doing this in chronological order, so after Horsin' Around, Bojack largely doesn't do anything with regard to work or his professional career, as he doesn't really need to, because he has the money to just do anything he wants to distract himself from how miserable he feels about himself. Like I said previously, that time at Horsin' Around, all those years feeling that apathy toward what he did, he lost that fervor that he had at the beginning, that drive to make something real, perhaps about his role model, Secretariat, and why he meant a great deal to him. And a part of him, I think, really feels resentment toward Horsin' Around for that. I mean, most of his behavior is largely his own fault, obviously, but it's an easy scapegoat for him to blame his generally messy and lazy lifestyle he's adopted after the success of this sitcom, where when he goes out into public, he's immediately recognized as the horse from Horsin' Around and loathes it, using that as an excuse to stay in and drink all of his days away. But it's also important to remember that despite the fact that we're going chronologically, this flashback to his time in 2007 is shown within the context of season 3, right when Bojack really begins the Oscar campaign in earnest.
Right. Ernest, California.
Ernest is not a city in Why do I try?
And reflects a piece of Bojack's emotional pattern overall, where he tries to reject the past, become something new, and move forward, where he tries to change his legacy in an effort to feel fulfilled, which is a piece of advice that Secretariat supported publicly on television. And even though Princess Carolyn is the one to convince him to meet Cuddly Whiskers and join on this project about, at least it seemed, a reformed alcoholic, which could be an effective drama and perhaps make a real difference in the world. That fear from repeating the mistakes of horsing around and living through that again really gets to Bojack. It really does seem like the executives stating that it could be just as big as horsing around is the main driving factor for him changing the entirety of the premise of this show. So after all this time spent resenting horsing around for making him the horse, from it, he makes a piece of media where he literally takes a dump on a VHS copy of Horsing Around. He tries to be as different from the typical basic television show he was making as possible, something that wasn't trying to appeal to everyone and that didn't care if it was successful. But they kind of created it during a fever dream, so it was just like bad, just really, really bad, like unsalvageably bad too. You'd think if they're making it week to week, they could really adjust their insane concept as the episodes go on so it wasn't so overtly terrible, but I guess it was just so bad that that wasn't even possible at that point. I mean, the show itself is really emblematic of the period of time between Horsing Around and when we begin the show. He feels lower than ever before and wastes a lot of his time doing nothing, watching movies, reruns of Horsing Around, drinking, doing drugs, and before he knows it, more time has gone by than he anticipated to spend wallowing in bed. Like the Bojack Horseman show wasted its opportunity to be meaningful, to be great, and before it knew it, it was struggling to stay on the air, even trying to use Sarah Lynn for clout before it was inevitably canceled. It is Bojack's extreme desire to do something entirely different, to change who he is as a person and never repeat the mistakes of his past so fervently that he makes some new mistakes. And then after a few more years of doing absolutely nothing, we reach the time when the show actually begins. That is, the show we watch on Netflix, where Bojack is working on his autobiographical novel, One Trick Pony.
This book is my one shot at preserving my legacy. I'm a joke. And if this book isn't good, I'm gonna be a joke forever. Everyone thinks that I'm just this washed up hack, but actually, oh God, actually, what if they're right?
Bojack has become fed up with this period of inertia in his life and resolves to work on something that will definitively change his public image, transforming him from the horse from Horsing Around to simply Bojack Horseman, a full, complex man who everyone loves, admires, and thinks is supremely awesome. The issue is, introspection, not his thing. So he struggles to actually write the damn book, refusing to take a hard look at his past, and eventually hiring Diane to write it for him, because as I just described, Bojack, taking the lead from Secretariat, is more of a move forward and forget kind of person, and it takes him a long time to realize that this doesn't necessarily work. And even after this, along with him making a promise to Diane to tell the full truth of his life in Bojack Hates the Troops, when the draft of the book is presented to him and a mirror is held up to his own behavior, he shrinks back into his shell of denial and self-importance. Can you not? Because even if he told Diane the truth, all about his ugly choices, he expected out of all of this a book that would make him look like a hero, make him look undefeatable, a legend, much like Secretariat was to him. Instead, she presents him as the fully flawed person that he truly is. All his alcoholism, his posturing and propping himself up, all that time he spent trying to convince her how cool and impressive he was, instead caused her to see through him and his need to impress others, especially Diane herself. And since he's so vehemently unable to accept this perception of himself, still trying to utilize that shield of fame to put himself on a level above everyone else, counteracting that feeling inside as if he's not worth anything, he lashes out toward Diane, saying some truly harsh things as he struggles to accept the person that he has become after all of these years. It isn't until he tries and aggressively fails to write the entire book himself in downer ending that he realizes how unrealistic this view of himself is, and how impossible it can be to keep up this perception constantly, especially if he has to invent an entire fake history for himself. I mean, his childhood was so aggressively terrible, he doesn't really have any sort of realistic positive stories to just put in there as fluff, even. He admits that he didn't really have a problem with the book or the writing itself. He had a problem with the person he saw on the pages. As he states, if Diane knows him better than anyone and sees him in this way, then what does that mean about him as a person? Is he still good? Can he still see himself as the hero when he so clearly has been shown that he isn't, even throughout that season with Herb directly telling him that he isn't a hero as well. He spent so much time treating people terribly, doing these underhanded things, but he still, in his heart, believed that he was a victim who was hurt, and that in general, he has no choice but to act this way, even though he is still a good person deep down. But Diane is not able to tell him what he needs to hear, given what he's learned about how she sees him based on the book. But in later, she explains that she couldn't tell him that he was a good person deep down at the Ghostwriter convention because she's not entirely sure that piece of people exists at all. She doesn't think Bojack is innately terrible, of course, but what she wrote in that book is what he gets. And if he wants to be perceived differently, he needs to do something to change it, because all we are is what we do. Which brings us to his next project, Secretariat.
This is the moment that Secretariat stops running. Because this is the moment you realize something inside you is broken, and it can never be fixed.
After the success that comes from bearing his soul in One Trick Pony, Bojack is finally able to get the traction to get the Secretariat movie made. He's at last able to achieve that dream that he's been longing for since he began his career in Hollywood, or even likely since he was a child. I mean, he practically worshipped Secretariat, the only positive horse role model in his life, and he wanted to be him in every way because he was terrified of becoming his parents. We see this when Secretariat endorses Nixon and smokes a cigarette back in the 80s, as Bojack picks up a cigarette himself and tries to emulate his behavior, even using the same words, quickly realizing it was a mistake though because his mother comes in the room. But it's clear how much Bojack respects and wants to be like Secretariat. Although when he was a child, Bojack definitely saw Secretariat as more well-adjusted than he really was, but even in his later years, after Bojack has recognized that Secretariat is an inherently flawed individual, it's still super important for Bojack to tell his story because of how much he identifies with him. So to be able to play him, embody him, in a movie, that would, at least Bojack thinks, fulfill his entire life's purpose, permanently tying him to the figure of Secretariat, immortalizing him, and making a profound difference in society that would definitively prove that his own existence has innate meaning, and that his parents, in turn, were wrong for their judgment and mistreatment of him. He would be able to do like Secretariat always advised and move forward, move past all of that. He's really reinvigorated toward his life in general, given this new sense of purpose, and does take some steps to change his behavior and hopefully make more of a positive difference in the world around him, letting people further past his walls than he's used to, and trying to be better to those friends he does still have around him. However, one thing that he discovers when he tries to embody Secretariat, he still has to be able to go to those dark places. He can't just ignore his entire past and move forward, as Secretariat's advice always said. He needs to acknowledge it, to understand it, to be able to give an informed performance, which he is able to do and is willing to do, as again, he feels utterly connected to Secretariat as a person, and that's why it's so important to him that he makes this biopic accurately, showcasing all of Secretariat's flaws alongside his victories and portraying the complicated man that America sees as a hero and currently still loves, hopefully extending that perception to himself of a flawed, imperfect person, but still someone worthy of praise and love from the general public. So when the studio begins to chop up the story and sanitize it for modern audiences, Bojack goes to extreme lengths to continue making the film he always intended to, against their wishes, which, as the industry tends to do, goes unappreciated and is in fact resented, leading Kelsey to lose her job as the director and the film to be sanitized even more so than before. When Bojack senses the same thing happening as to what he participated in with Horsing Around, he loses his entire sense of purpose purpose in the project itself, essentially giving up and abandoning it to find meaning elsewhere, away from his professional career, leading them to make the movie without him, utilizing CGI and likely AI technology to superimpose him into every single scene, thus rendering this entire project, this entire endeavor, not Bojack's own, not something that he can use to prove his own worth, not anything that he has actually done to make a difference. It's really very telling that Bojack's singular purpose, what was supposed to be the apex of his accomplishments, ends up not fulfilling him in the way that he needs either. And I enjoy how much they highlight Secretariat and his theme of continuing to move forward, never looking back, and just running as fast as you can, while Bojack experiences vividly how this does not work. And it mirrors Secretariat's journey himself, where he continued to try moving forward. He continued thinking that he could run away from all of the mistakes that he's made. But eventually, he can't. And instead of looking back and trying to do better in the future, he just gives up. And that's exactly what Bojack does on this project. But that doesn't stop him from taking credit for it through the Oscar campaign.
Years after I die, people will still be able to see me in Secretariat.
And then what?
And then, I'll be remembered. If I win an Oscar, I'll be remembered.
And then what?
And then my life will have meaning. I don't know.
Now, this is not necessarily an actual job, but it is a months-long endeavor that consumes a lot of his time, and is a great indicator of the place that Bojack is in during Season 3. He now places his entire identity, his entire legacy, into this piece of media that he did not even participate in, and is actively engaged in living out that lie for the public, even reaching for award praise to ensure that everyone remembers it for the rest of at least his time on Earth. This is a great signal of how Secretariat has failed Bojack as the project that was supposed to give his life meaning, and has set him up to be in this hyper-vulnerable place. He is resolving to take credit for this fraud of a performance to bolster his self-esteem after everything that was supposed to uplift him, provide him that meaning he had searched for, and solve that disconnect with regard to his self-worth, failed to supply any sort of that benefit. His entire personality is a mask right now, even that casual movie star persona that has everything together, as Bojack hides one of his worst mistakes his entire life thus far: Penny in New Mexico. This deceptive campaign to get America to love him is incredibly indicative of Bojack's coping mechanisms at this point in time, where he isn't really acknowledging any real issues with his personality or his decision-making skills, and is simply trying to barrel forward as a movie star, hoping that saves him, even though he is lying about his own accomplishments. And while he does try to work on treating people around him a bit better initially, like Todd, there's not much follow-through on the effort, as he still actively ignores Todd's wants and needs and doesn't really think outside his own self-absorbed loathing. Once again, it's a very cursory resolution, one that only goes surface level and doesn't extend far past pleasantries, as well as nowhere near the actual roots of the issues. I mean, in this first episode where Bojack demonstrates he's trying to be nicer and more gracious to Todd, he also lets him completely get lost in New York City on his own and doesn't really care that he doesn't see him for extended periods of time. So once this endeavor too fails, and he has even less than he did after the end of Season 2, he sinks lower than he ever has before, nearly losing everyone around him and convincing Sarah Lynn to go on a bender with him in those last months, eventually leading to her death. But after this rock bottom, Bojack makes a genuine effort to change throughout Season 4, really without the involvement of any professional projects or jobs. That is, except for Felicity Huffman's Booty Academy.
On Booty Academy, we're here to find out who's got the right behind and who's going to be left behind. Bojack, do you have anything you'd like to say to the contestants before we give our verdict?
No, I'm good.
I know what you're thinking. Alex, why the fuck did you even include this one? But just stay with me here. This is a pretty unique choice for him, and it does provide a good symbol for his arc overall in Season 4, where he's largely trying to do better, be more generous to those around him. So the fact that he has not only agreed to do this show that he has no interest in, but that he follows through with it even after learning how stupid it truly is quite astounding for his character. And though it doesn't last for very long because he tries to use the crew for his own benefit, and also for Hollyhock's benefit, worth stating a little bit, it does show us how Bojack is changing, at least a little bit. And along those lines, he also agrees to do a show that he has no personal connection to or even interest in, really, solely to help out Princess Carolyn, and that, of course, is Filbert.
Filbert, he's a drunk, he's an asshole. I don't want to be him.
So maybe you don't be the drunk asshole. Maybe this time you have a good attitude and you don't drink so much and you show up for your call time and then you put on the Filbert costume and you pretend to be this other guy. And then when you're done shooting, you take off your costume and you're Bojack, the star of the show that everybody likes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Filbert is a show almost specifically designed to highlight Bojack's flaws. Not purposefully by the people who designed it in-universe, but, you know, obviously the writers of Bojack Horseman intended it that way, but still. The whole main theme of Season 5 is introspection, realizing who you are and seeing exactly what you've truly done. Filbert as a show forces Bojack to truly examine his own behavior, as ugly as it was. When we begin in the lightbulb scene, playing Filbert really scares Bojack, showing him exactly what he's been doing all of these years. He expresses to Princess Carolyn that he doesn't want to be that person anymore, that embodying Filbert as a character makes him feel like the old Bojack, this drunk, rude asshole that he worked hard over the course of Season 4 to avoid being, to steer his behavior away from. Filbert is a character who is bitter, has lost a ton, and lashes out towards others because of it. Precisely the person Bojack has been for so many years. Princess Carolyn reminds him that he's only acting, it's all just pretend, and Bojack does take her advice initially, but eventually finds it difficult to maintain that new Bojack new habits with alcohol included, and begins sliding back, mirroring his personality along with Filbert's. It doesn't help that the opiates he begins taking blends the world of Filbert and Bojack Horseman together, only having him further immerse himself in this character and lean back on those negative qualities that they both perhaps share. Surrounded by all that behavior constantly and having to embody that person as an actor, he starts to lose the line where Bojack ends and Filbert starts. However, Bojack gets a harsh reality check in sub from Diane, where after he states that he's fixed and doesn't perhaps need therapy, Diane tries to tell him that he shouldn't just give up and assume he's better off just because Indira declared she was better off. There's a ton that he can talk about if he just admits that he needs the help, like Diane can, instead of pretending Dr. Indira is just a friend he chats with on their lunch break. But Bojack refusing to listen causes her to feel the need to demonstrate to him how damaged he truly is and the gravity of the mistakes he's made writing the New Mexico scandal into Filbert and forcing him to relive the entire scenario. She's trying to communicate how far Bojack still has to go to truly reform as a person, as well as how much he's denying by simply moving forward. He takes what Princess Carolyn says and acts as if he and Filbert don't have any similarities. He is acting as Filbert and there is nothing that connects them as a person. But he should reckon with the fact that Filbert and him are similar people who make similarly catastrophic mistakes, and he is far from fixed or someone who doesn't need therapy, even though he may deny it. It's true what Princess Carolyn says. He does not have to act like Filbert. He is just pretending, but it's also worth noting the similarities between their two personas. Instead, however, Bojack just begins to retreat harsher into this fantasy world of Filbert, adopting his paranoia, also likely thanks to the pain medication he's constantly taking. But as Filbert becomes more and more mistrustful of those around him, in his reality for fear that they'll find out his secret of murdering his wife, Bojack begins to feel the same, shielding himself from every supportive figure in his own life, pushing away Hollyhock, Diane, Princess Carolyn, all as he falls further back into this character and determines his actions even more off of what Filbert would do, or, in reality, what old Bojack would do, until the two realities eventually clash, his emotions confusing what is a fictional scene in the drama and what is actually real life. and struggling to snap out of that rage, he physically overpowers Gina and nearly kills her on the set. This, being one of Bojack's worst moments thus far, prompts him to finally go to rehab and admit that he needs help with his recovery, that he can't do this on his own. Because Filbert, as a show, helped him to see exactly who he truly was. Like I said, the writers don't exactly shy away from showing you that Filbert is Bojack in a way, and trying to deny that they are in any way alike is only dooming him to repeat the same cycles and make even worse mistakes. But it's also through this that he's able to get his most harsh realization of all thus far and actually go to get help. And when he's out, he can become something completely new. Professor Horseman. This is a new era for Bojack, a time when he is truly searching for meaning, perhaps more earnestly than he ever has before, and his job reflects that, taking a position at a university to teach the next generation what he has learned about acting and the entertainment industry. It's not something that gives him a ton of glory, or puts him in a position to be a part of elite society. In fact, it's one of the most relatively normal positions Bojack has been in his entire life. Stable, lacking in drama, and most importantly, emotionally rewarding. He spends his time helping students through dilemmas, supporting Hollyhock as best he can, and not really thinking about himself all too much, a far cry from his pursuits in Hollywood throughout the series. And this is coupled with many positive and generous acts for his friends, aside from his job at the school. Like I said, his teaching is a really poignant symbol for this new era of compassion. Unfortunately, after the second interview with Biscuits Braxby, he loses this opportunity due to his past transgressions, which moves his life into a new, far more uncertain era, leading us to Bojack's last project that we're ever able to see him perform in, The Horny Unicorn.
The Horny Unicorn?
Yeah, 'cause deep down, he's wounded. He's misunderstood. It's not his fault he's the way he is, and people are gonna see that.
Yeah?
Yeah! He's like, hey, buddy, I never asked to be the horny unicorn. What, you think I like it that I gotta jizz rainbows every 20 minutes to keep my horn from going soft?
I don't know.
Come on, I know you need the money. Why do you gotta stop punishing yourself?
Such a shame that this is the last thing that Bojack does as an actor for us, given how abhorrent Vance Wagner is. And honestly, I think the idea is shit too, but apparently Hollywood liked it, so who knows. The entire message of this piece is that Bojack has given up on trying to be better, given up on rehabilitating himself and trying to earn friendship from those he cares about. Instead, he makes this piece of media with a man who refuses to admit any of his own flaws and is actively abusing his own family, that states that there's nothing he can do about himself, about his behavior or his presentation, and that everyone should be able to accept him for who he is, because frankly, he's not a fan of himself either. Directly ignoring that crucially important message that had been delivered to him time and time again, most notably from Todd. You can't just keep doing shitty things and feel bad about them like that makes it okay. You need to be better. Accepting people for who they are is not an all-inclusive ability. It is so important, yes, but it doesn't mean you should excuse or ignore overt flaws, especially if they hurt your own emotional health or begin to affect your self-worth. Listen, it's a free country, so Bojack could choose to continue being an asshole, relying on alcohol, pushing people away, and reeling them back in, but it's also free in that he can't expect everyone to stick around as he does so. They won't always come back because they don't owe you their company. People aren't just going to take all of the shit that you fling at them. That is completely unreasonable. And Horny Unicorn itself is a denial of that idea, that people like Bojack are people who can work to be better. He's falling back on what Beatrice taught him, that mindset that kept him trapped for this entire series, that he was born broken and he'll never be able to fix it, that he had a leak in him and he won't be able to get any sort of goodness back inside of him. But that's never, ever been true, nor is it what the show as a whole is trying to say. I've said this so many times on this channel, but it really can't be spoken enough. Nobody is broken as a person fundamentally. We can all work to do better. Yes, it is harder for some due to circumstances out of their control, like their upbringing or genetic predispositions to alcoholism, but it is still possible, and dooming yourself to some idea of a messed up person permanently is not a way to improve or get better, and will only stunt your growth in the long run, nor will you be able to keep any long-lasting, supportive relationships. And I'm glad that even though The Horny Unicorn was Bojack's last official professional project, he still did move on from this idea, as Bojack as a series is trying to tell you that it's never over for you. Even after Bojack almost dies, it is not over. His life still continues. There's always more show. So you should work to be the best person that you can be, because you can always turn yourself around. But it's worth noting that professional projects aren't usually the way to do it. But through Bojack's career choices, we get a lot of insight into his thought processes and how he thinks about himself and the world around him. He goes through many different phases, some of them the same, as Bojack does show us a very repeating cycle over the course of the series, but the things that he chooses to involve himself in are always uniquely capable of showcasing the period of life that he's in and underlining the idea of each season that the project takes place in. Truly, such great writing from this show. I love how every part of the story lends itself to this main message, and I really loved analyzing this. Great idea. I'm gonna post the comment that this came from. This came from a viewer. I did not come up with this idea on my own, and it ended up being a really fun video. So, if you have any ideas, leave them in the comments below. Like I said, never be afraid to share with me if you have any ideas for a video, because I usually will take your advice, because you guys have some great ideas. Also, if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/PosiTVty. That's PosiTVty. There you get extra content in the form of unedited essays, and you get all of this content way before it comes out on YouTube. Like, I'm actually like doing really good right now. I'm way ahead on Patreon. They're like 5 videos ahead of the people on YouTube. So by the time you're seeing this, I mean, I've already made like 2 more Bojack essays that you could watch on there. So go there for extra content, but also just supporting us on YouTube means so much. I really do appreciate it. Seriously, every like, subscriber, every comment, every bit of discussion just means a lot to me as a person. Like I said before, I never thought that I could be doing this as a job, and I just feel really grateful to you guys for allowing me to talk about all of the TV shows that I like ad nauseum, because let's be honest, my friends are tired of hearing it. But anyway, I will see you for the next one, and go to the mirror and point out one aspect of your appearance that you enjoy. Give yourself a compliment. You deserve it, you handsome devil.